Here's what it comes down to, guys. 80% of your training's got to be easy. 20% is hard. But did you know that 20% of your training makes up for 80% of your fitness? That only comes from getting real comfortable with being uncomfortable. Today, we talk about the uncomfortable and how to get faster, better, and learn how to take your training to the next level. All right, guys, so we've talked about that 80-20 principle before. If you checked out our last Zone 2 video, we talked about that easy pace stuff, how to build that aerobic engine. Today, we're gonna talk about that uncomfortable stuff, okay? What I find is most people spend the majority of their time kind of in this little gray area. So in other words, what they're doing is they're training too fast to get any kind of real aerobic benefit, so it's not really easy and they kind of tend to break their body down, but they're running too slow to get any type of real threshold or anaerobic type of adaptations within their body. And so what we want to talk, we always talk about the 80-20, we always say 80% is easy, so it's a lot of volume, and then the 20% is really hard, right? And well, that really hard just means is you are challenging yourself to the place where you're super uncomfortable. That can be done through threshold training, tempo runs, interval sessions. It can be done if you're doing like more of a Hyrox style training. It could mean that you're doing a threshold effort in the gym where you're maybe from an erg to a sled push, whatever it may be. But the whole goal is to get your heart rate elevated, zone 4, maybe even a little bit into zone 5, where you feel like, hey, I don't want to do this anymore, but you continue to keep going. And so today, that's how we're going to break it down. And so we want to really talk about some very specific things. First thing is, what exactly is threshold training? What does that mean? We're also going to get into how do we create a training plan, or how do we work it into our training plan where we don't injure ourselves. And then we're also going to talk about how do we relate that to our racing strategy. All of that and more coming up next. What exactly is threshold training or tempo training, okay? So there's kind of some synonymous terms that go with tempo runs, threshold runs, things of that nature. But ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to increase our lactate threshold. So your lactate threshold is an effort you can maintain for about 60 to 90 minutes, and that just really has a lot to do with your fitness level and your volume. An effort you can maintain for about that amount of time before you see this like significant decrease in your overall performance, okay? And so those can be done, like I said earlier, through some runs. They can be done through specific training, but it's usually very time-based or very distance-based, okay? And so a traditional threshold run that I might assign somebody might be anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. And so you start out, we pick whatever your threshold pace is, which is usually somewhere between your 10K to half marathon pace. And then we would try to hit that pace for maybe the first week we might do 15, the second week we might do 20, the third week we might do 25, just adding a little bit of distance or time to each one of those weeks. And so the goal is to get yourself in that zone 4, into that lactate threshold. And so as we do that, what happens is your body becomes much more efficient at processing that lactate. So flushing out that waste so that you can continue to keep pushing and you can maintain that effort, right? So another way or another type of threshold training could be done in the gym, right? So doing compromised workouts like you would do for Hyrox, where maybe you are running, you come in, you're on a skier or you're pushing a sled. But once again, it's very, very specific to time-based, steady movement. So in other words, we're not taking these long breaks in between. That would be kind of closer to an interval effort that may be more VO2 max, more anaerobic. And so as threshold training continues throughout the process, what really should happen is that somewhere, probably I would say, if you just to give you a feeling, is probably the first 3/4 of the time you're doing the effort, it should feel pretty manageable, and I don't want to say easy, but very manageable, like, hey, I can do this. And then that last quarter, that last bit of time, you're like, man, I want this to be done. I am uncomfortable. I don't like this anymore. I'm hurting. And so you continue to push through. So what that really teaches you, it teaches you how to be comfortable being uncomfortable. See, what we have to do is in our adaptation time, it takes your body about 4 to 6 weeks to adapt to any type of new stimulus. So what we want to do is within that 4-week period is we want to learn to stretch our body. We want to learn to stretch our muscles, stretch our lungs, stretch our cardiorespiratory system. And that allows us to take that next step up. So if you don't have threshold training within your normal regimen, they're great for Hyrox. They're specific for Hyrox. They're great for 10K. It's going to be great for half marathon and even marathon to an extent. And so understanding that whatever event you're doing, whatever your ultimate goal of distance, race, whatever is going to be, you have to train the energy system that you're going to be utilizing. So for Hyrox, it's got to have a huge aerobic base, but you also are going to be in your lactate threshold for a very large amount of time. For a half marathon, yes, it is a base of aerobic capacity, but you are going to be in your lactate threshold. So you have to train that, and you got to get better at it. I get it, I need to be uncomfortable and I need to get comfortable doing it. But how do I put it into my training program? How do I be intentional with that threshold training? Well, here's what it comes down to, guys, okay? Remember the 80-20 principle, all right? So there's an 80-20 principle and there's a 20-80 principle, and they kind of work together. So 80% of our volume has to be easy. So real simple math, let's say you're doing 20 miles of running a week. What that means is if you're operating off that 80-20 principle, that means 20% of those miles can be more challenging miles. So if you're doing 20 miles, that means about 4 miles of that can be maybe threshold training or more intense mileage, right? And so how do I put that into my training? Well, I decide, all right, well, I've got 20 miles to work with. 4 of them is gonna be more challenging. What is that 4 miles gonna look like? And some of that has to do with the event that you are gonna be training for. But to give you an example, say it is Hyrox, okay? And so within Hyrox, what you are gonna be doing is you're gonna be running 8 1-kilometer runs. Now, 1 kilometer is not that far, okay? It's just over a half a mile. But when you do it 8 times, and then in between that, you add higher intensity workouts, what you are doing is you are staying at a high elevated heart rate pretty much the entirety of the event. So you need to learn, what does that feel like? So for say something like Hyrox, some really great training and runs would be things doing threshold runs, like I mentioned, tempo runs, where you're running for 15, 20, 30 minutes at a time, where you're holding a steady state pace, right? Now that pace is probably gonna be a little slower than your actual Hyrox pace. It may be your Hyrox pace if you're like a more elite athlete, but it might be a little bit slower because of the extended period of time. Another way to do it would be like doing repeats, 800 meter. You need to do long intervals, so that's anywhere from like 800 up to like say 2,000 meters, where you're doing intervals with like say a like 1-to-2 work ratio or 2-to-1 work ratio, right? So in other words, if it takes you 4 minutes to run a 1,000 meters, well then you take like a 2-minute break. So that shorter break, what that does, it doesn't allow your heart rate to fully recover and come all the way down, so that you are still in a threshold effort. If you go like 1-to-1 or you go 1-to-2, or like you're running for 4 and resting for 8, where your heart rate has enough time to come down, you're fully recovered. And so that's the type of effort you want to push a little bit harder. But for a threshold effort, if you're trying to do intervals, I would say somewhere between like a 1-to-2 or 2-to-1 work to rest ratio, right? And so if you have that shorter rest, then your heart rate stays elevated. You can run whatever that goal race pace is maybe for your Hyrox. Another really good effort would be that kind of what we call a compromised workout, okay? And a compromised workout just simply means you're running or doing some sort of higher aerobic or threshold type conditioning effort with like something like a sled push, strength effort, okay? And so what happens is you learn to run off of tired legs. So when you are pushing a sled, you need to learn what that's gonna feel like coming out of that sled to have to go back and try to run your race pace again. Coming out of the skier, what are you gonna feel like going back into the run? Or on the flip side of that, what is it gonna feel like coming off the run and having to do burpees and see how your heart rate skyrockets again? And so those are gonna be ways that you can implement them. So here's my suggestion. If you're training for something like Hyrox, I would make the suggestion that you have plenty of aerobic-based training. That can be done through running, it can be done through cycling, it can be done through rowing, skiing, swimming, where you're in that zone 2 low intensity. And that kind of sets the foundation for how much harder training you can do throughout the week, because you want to keep that 80-20 balance. And then when you get to the threshold efforts, I would suggest if you're going to be training really like legitimately for Hyrox, you need probably 2 efforts a week. Maybe one that is specifically running, where you're doing a threshold type effort, where you're just running steady without stopping for 15 to 30 minutes. And then one effort that is that compromised effort, where you're coming in, you're doing some sort of workout, you're going and running again. You're coming in, you're doing some kind of workout, you're skiing or something like that. And if you have 2 of those efforts in, based off of the volume you're doing throughout the week, and you are making yourself uncomfortable and trying to learn how to stay steady, you're gonna get really good at Hyrox really quick. How do we balance this with the easy and the hard and be effective in our training? So you've heard me say this before, consistency will always beat intensity, because intensity cannot be consistent. You cannot be consistently intense, because eventually your body breaks down, it gets tired. So learning to balance, right? Learning how to prioritize the easy over the hard is very important, because I am not telling you to go out there and just be hard all the time, okay? You just cannot do that. So you have to be very intentional about how you put those workouts in and make sure you're getting the most bang for your buck. But what I'm also telling you is don't avoid discomfort, okay? I do this all the time. I train people, I'll bring them in, and what I'll learn is, the first thing I'll learn is they don't know what easy feels like, okay? So that's the first thing I try to teach people because we understand that's the foundation where we get the volume from. The next thing I have to teach people is how to be uncomfortable, okay? Because the moment real discomfort sets in, people start slowing down, they start shutting down. I give them a pace to run. I say, okay, I want you to go out and run 30 minutes at a 7-minute pace. And their first mile, they go run at 6:30. But then the last few miles are like 7:10, 7:30. So they end up averaging maybe a 7-minute pace, but they don't actually average a 7-minute pace. They blew up is what really happened. And so learning how to control yourself, learning how to be steady in the pacing, even when you're not comfortable, is an art, and it takes time to learn that. And the only way you're gonna do that is by actually practicing it over and over and over again, okay? But the one thing I'm trying to really encourage you is don't avoid discomfort. We have to get into a place of discomfort. You will not run a race. If you wanna be as good as you can be, if you wanna reach your full potential, I guarantee you there will never be a race that you run where at some point in the race you're not questioning your decisions. You're not thinking to yourself, why am I doing this? This is the dumbest thing. This is so stupid. And then eventually you pass the finish line and you think to yourself, why didn't I go faster? I could have gone faster, right? So that pain can be fairly temporary, right? That's an old saying we used to have is pain is temporary, but pride is forever, right? Well, the key is simply this, is if you train properly, you learn how to work through that discomfort. You learn how to focus on what you can do to keep moving forward. And the only way you do that is through practice, okay? Practice brings progression, not perfection, but progression. And so we always tell our athletes, nothing new on race day. So what that simply means is we've never ran a pace, we've never practiced before. We know what our splits are gonna be on our ergs. We know how many burpees we're gonna do before we take a break because we have put that through the test in our training. And so by the time you get to the race, you know what the expectation is, so you're not surprised at mile 10 or at mile 5 or at the lunges, okay? You're not cramping because you didn't prepare yourself properly. This is the secret sauce right here, guys. 80% of your performance, 80% of your fitness is gonna come from that 20%. So that's the 80-20, 20-80 rule. 80% of the stuff we do needs to be easy, but 80% of our fitness and our overall end result is gonna come from that 20%. So when we put in the work very intentionally on those speed efforts, on those strength efforts, on those compromised workouts, that's what helps you ascend to the next level. So I encourage you guys to get out there, figure out how am I gonna implement, be very intentional about it, write it down on a piece of paper, know the day or the 2 days that you're gonna do it so that you know how to progress properly and you can kind of see the end goal so that you don't do too much too quick because all that's gonna do is lead to injury. And remember, it's all about being consistent. All right, guys, well, remember the easy stuff builds the engine, but the hard stuff is what's gonna teach you how to use it. So I hope that was beneficial for you. I hope you got something out of it. If you did, please share it with somebody you think might learn something from it or benefit from it. And I wanna know from you, what do you dread more? Running easy or doing the hard stuff? What is the thing that you tend to put off more than anything else? As always, guys, we always appreciate when you come in to Running with James, whether you're listening to the podcast or whether you're watching us online. We thank you so much for being a part of our community. Make sure that if you haven't done so, make sure you like, you share, subscribe, hit that little notification bell. It helps us out so very much. And if you want more content like this, if you want things like our Coach's Corner, it's a series we got going on right now on our Patreon account. You can just simply go to patreon.com/runningwithjames, and we have all different levels where you can become a member and support what it is that we're doing here at Running with James and BC Fitness. So guys, thank you for coming in. Remember, when you change your mind, you change your life.